Offered everything in his country, all the natural resources. He even recorded a message to you in English recently, offering mediation. What should we do in order to stop that?
He has offered everything. He's offered everything. You're right. You know why? Because he doesn't want to around with the United States.
In the dead of night, the world changed. U.S. helicopters over Caracas, a foreign leader in handcuffs, and a promise to run a sovereign nation for its oil. It feels like a movie, but it is the new American reality. Tonight, we look at the unprecedented capture of Nicolas Maduro, the legal firestorm following it, and why your neighborhood gas station might be the next front in this conflict. In the quiet hours of Saturday, January 3rd, 2026, the citizens of Caracas, Venezuela, woke up to a sound many thought belonged to a different century. It was the heavy thrum of American military helicopters cutting through the night sky. This was not a training exercise, and it was not a diplomatic mission. It was a massive, pre-dawn military operation designed to do one thing: decapitate the government of a South American nation. By the time the sun came up, the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores, were no longer in their home country. They were being spirited away toward New York to face trial in an American courtroom. This operation was massive in scale, involving over 150 aircraft and elite special operations teams. The attack began around 2 a.m. with explosions rocking the capital city. Reports indicate that U.S. forces knocked out the electricity in large parts of Caracas to mask their movements. It was a scene of overwhelming force. Maduro was reportedly captured near one of his safe houses while attempting to reach a steel-reinforced safe room. He didn't make it in time. Within hours, the White House released a photograph that seemed designed to send a message to the world. It showed a blindfolded Nicolas Maduro wearing a simple sweatsuit sitting on board the USS Iwo Jima. Later that day, President Donald Trump stood at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida to confirm the news. Alongside him were Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. The president's message was urgent and clear.
According to the New York Times, they're reporting that the dancing videos really, Nicolas Maduro sort of behaving like he was calling the president's bluff, really acting nonchalantly about these threats. And that was really the last straw for the president, these dancing videos. That's according to that reporting, to where they finally went in to go get him.
He announced that the United States would now run the country of Venezuela. He promised a transition that would be safe, proper, and judicious. But he also made it very clear that the U.S. was not leaving anytime soon. He stated that American oil companies would be moving in to rebuild the country's infrastructure and that the U.S. would be taking back the oil. This is the most significant development in U.S.-Latin American relations in nearly 40 years. For many experts, this feels like a return to gunboat diplomacy, an era where the U.S. treated the Caribbean as its own private lake. But even in that era, the U.S. rarely went this far. The seizure of a foreign leader in South America is, by all accounts, unprecedented. While the U.S. has intervened in the region before, it has never directly removed a South American head of state in this manner. We are in uncharted territory, and the consequences are already rippling across the globe. To understand how we got here, we have to look at the narrative the administration has built over the last few months. President Trump has characterized this as a domestic law enforcement matter rather than an act of war. The official justification is built on drug trafficking charges. Maduro was indicted back in 2020 on narco-terrorism charges, and a fresh indictment was recently unsealed against his wife and several others. The administration claims that Maduro has waged a campaign of deadly narco-terrorism against American citizens. However, these justifications are being met with intense scrutiny and factual challenges. For example, the president has repeatedly claimed that every boat the U.S. strikes off the coast of Venezuela saves 25,000 American lives. Fact checkers have pointed out that this math doesn't add up. If it were true, the number of people saved by recent strikes would be 11 times higher than the total number of overdose deaths in the entire United States for a year. Furthermore, experts note that very little fentanyl actually comes from Venezuela. Most of the cocaine produced in the region is headed for Europe, not the U.S. There is also the claim that Maduro was sending savage and murderous gangs like the Tren de Aragua to terrorize American cities. But a report from the National Intelligence Council found no evidence that the Maduro regime was directing these gangs to the United States. While the gangs are a real problem, the link to Maduro's government appears to be a rhetorical device rather than a documented intelligence fact. Despite these questions, the administration is moving forward with its plan to govern Venezuela from Washington. President Trump has indicated that a group of officials, including Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, will be in charge of designating who runs the country. He has expressed open interest in Venezuela's oil reserves, which are the largest in the world. The president's logic is transactional. He argues that an American occupation won't cost us a penny because the U.S. will be reimbursed by the money coming out of the ground. This resource imperialism is not a new idea for Donald Trump. Throughout his political career, he has suggested that the U.S. should have taken the oil in Iraq as compensation for the war. Now he is applying that same logic to our neighbors in the South. He has even gone so far as to rename the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America as part of this new policy pivot. This is a fundamental shift in American foreign policy. It discards decades of diplomacy in favor of what experts call an aggressive might makes right approach. But as we have seen in previous conflicts, removing a leader is often the easy part. Governing is where things get complicated. Right now, the situation on the ground in Caracas is a tense calm. While Maduro is in a jail cell in New York, his government is still largely in place. His vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, was reportedly sworn in as the interim leader by the Venezuelan Supreme Court. Trump and Rubio claimed that she was willing to cooperate and do what we think is necessary. But that story fell apart almost immediately. Rodriguez appeared on state television to denounce the U.S. attack as brutal aggression. She called the capture of Maduro a kidnapping and demanded his immediate release. She insisted that Venezuela would never again be anyone's colony. This presents a massive problem for the White House. If the person they expect to run the country is calling them kidnappers, the safe and judicious transition they promised looks more like a recipe for a long-term quagmire. The fallout isn't limited to Venezuela. Tensions are exploding with Colombia, a country that has been a close U.S. partner for years. President Trump recently described Colombia as very sick and called its president, Gustavo Petro, a sick man who likes making cocaine. There is no evidence that President Petro is involved in the drug trade, but Trump has already suggested that military action against Colombia sounds good. Petro, a former guerrilla who demobilized years ago to help write Colombia's constitution, has not taken these threats lightly. He warned that if the U.S. bombs his country, thousands of peasants will take up arms in the mountains. He stated clearly that for his homeland, he would take up arms again. This war of words is creating a sense of dread throughout Latin America. Leaders from Brazil to Mexico have condemned the U.S. intervention as a violation of sovereignty. Brazilian President Lula da Silva called it a grave affront and an unacceptable line. Even at home, the administration's actions are raising serious legal and constitutional questions. One of the most glaring issues is that Congress was never notified before the attack began. Under the War Powers Resolution of 1973, the president is supposed to consult with Congress before introducing U.S. forces into hostilities. But Marco Rubio argued that notifying lawmakers sounded the alarm. They argue that the president has put American service members at risk in an unauthorized attack. They also point out that the administration has no long-term strategy and no plan to mitigate the risks of this escalation. From an international law perspective, the attack is being called plainly illegal by legal scholars. It violates the United Nations Charter, which prohibits the use of force against the territorial integrity of any state. Experts point out that international law does not recognize a right to use force to promote democracy or to extract a person for domestic criminal prosecution. While the U.S. might rely on a doctrine called male captus benedetentus, which basically means wrongly captured but properly held, this is not widely accepted by the international community. There is also the question of head of state immunity. Under international law, a sitting president usually enjoys personal immunity from the criminal jurisdiction of other states. The Trump administration argues that they don't recognize Maduro as the president because of the fraudulent 2024 election. But legal experts say that what matters is who exercises effective control over the territory. Since Maduro was in power until the moment he was snatched by special forces, he may still be entitled to immunity in an American court. While the legal battles play out in New York, the economic impact is being felt in the markets. On Monday morning, oil prices were surprisingly steady, but equity markets showed signs of nerves. In Canada, oil producers saw their stocks tumble. Traders are worried that if Venezuela's massive oil reserves are brought back online under U.S. control, it could flood the market and hurt producers in North America. However, energy analysts warn that a quick fix for Venezuela's oil industry is a fantasy. The country's infrastructure has suffered from decades of neglect and mismanagement. Fixing the pipelines, power supplies, and refineries will cost tens of billions of dollars and take years of work. Even with American oil giants like Chevron and ExxonMobil ready to go in, it's not a simple restart. The oil there is extra heavy and sulfur-rich, which makes it complicated and expensive to process. Beyond the economics, there is a massive humanitarian crisis that could get much worse. 8 million people have already fled Venezuela due to economic collapse. Now, there are reports of panic buying and empty shelves in Caracas as people fear what comes next. If the government institutions fracture, the food distribution networks that millions of people rely on could collapse. Experts warn that striking a regime without a plan for what follows often creates a vacuum of violence. As former Secretary of State Colin Powell famously said, "If you break it, you own it." And that is perhaps the most pressing question for the American people. Does the U.S. now own Venezuela? President Trump has spent years campaigning on a promise to end endless wars and stop reckless regime change. He has repeatedly criticized previous administrations for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but now he has initiated the largest military intervention in Latin America in decades. He is talking about putting boots on the ground and running a country of 28 million people. This is a complete reversal of the America First principles that many of his supporters embraced. It's a move that echoes the neoconservative policies of the past, with figures like Lindsey Graham cheering the move as a good thing that makes America safer. But for those who remember the long occupations of the early 2000s, this feels like a dangerous déjà vu. The global reaction is also creating new risks. China, which has invested over $60 billion in Venezuela, is deeply shocked and has condemned the attack as a violation of international law. They are already using this moment to portray themselves as the responsible global actor compared to the imperialist United States. Russia is similarly outraged, seeing the removal of their strategic partner as a direct threat. There are fears that if the U.S. feels it can unilaterally depose leaders in its hemisphere, other powers like China might use that same logic to move on Taiwan. As we watch this unfold, we see a world where the old rules are being torn up in real time. The Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine essentially says that the United States will do whatever it takes to ensure its dominance in the Western Hemisphere. It is a policy based on strength, force, and the pursuit of national interest above all else. But strength without a plan can lead to chaos. Right now, the administration's plan for Venezuela has been described as having only concepts of a plan. They want the oil, they want the leaders in jail, and they want the migrants to go back. But they are attempting to do this by working with the remnants of the very regime they just attacked. It is a high-stakes gamble with millions of lives in the balance. In the coming weeks, we will see Maduro appear in a New York courtroom. We will see if the U.S. military is pulled deeper into a South American occupation, and we will see if the jaguar that President Petro warned about is unleashed in Colombia. For now, the image of the nighttime helicopters over Caracas remains a symbol of a new era. Whether it is an era of renewed American greatness or the start of a new costly quagmire remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The map of the world was redrawn this weekend, and the ink is still very wet. Let's talk about the oil specifically, because that seems to be the heart of the president's interest here. In his press conference, he mentioned that U.S. oil companies have been waiting to go in for a long time. He called the previous nationalization of oil assets one of the largest thefts of property in history. He wants that property back, but experts point out that this isn't just about getting even for old losses. It's about a broader worldview where fossil fuel dominance is the key to national power. This extractive logic is something the president has voiced directly, whereas previous administrations might have cloaked it in talk of market stability or multilateralism. By telling the world we are taking the oil, he is signaling that the United States no longer feels bound by the international norms that forbid the pillaging of a country's natural resources. Legal scholars cite the Hague Convention of 1907, which says that private property must be respected and cannot be confiscated during war. They warn that if "to the victors go the spoils" becomes the new legal doctrine, it would mean that any country could justify invading its neighbors to steal their resources. This is exactly the kind of logic the world rejected when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990. The irony is that while the president claims this is about stopping drugs, his focus on oil reinforces the claim that the war on drugs was always a pretext for regime change. Even the Venezuelan opposition, led by Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado, seems to be getting sidelined in this new arrangement. Trump has expressed doubts about her ability to govern, despite the fact that she has an approval rating of over 70% among Venezuelans. Instead, the administration seems to prefer working with the existing power structures, the very people who served under Maduro, as long as they follow Washington's orders. This raises a profound question. Is this about bringing democracy to Venezuela, or is it about bringing Venezuela under American management? The human cost of this intervention is also beginning to emerge. While there were no U.S. casualties reported, at least 40 people died during the initial strikes, including civilians. The Venezuelan government claims the attacks hit multiple states across the country. As the state of emergency continues, the international community is left to wonder where the line will be drawn. If the United States can snatch the president of Venezuela because of an indictment in New York, who is next? The president has already mentioned Mexico and Cuba in the same breath as Venezuela and Colombia. This has created a shock to the system for leaders around the world. Some may decide to bow to U.S. pressure out of fear. Others may bind themselves even closer to China or Russia as a form of political insurance. We also have to consider the message this sends to our allies. Countries like New Zealand have expressed concern and emphasized the importance of international law. The European Union is hesitating, trying to balance their dislike of Maduro with their commitment to global rules. If the U.S. continues to act unilaterally, it could fracture the alliances that have been the bedrock of American security for generations. In Washington, the political battle is just beginning. Senators like Bernie Sanders have called the intervention rank imperialism and a return to the darkest chapters of U.S. history. They argue that it will leave a terrible legacy and should be condemned by the democratic world. On the other side, Republicans like John Thune have praised the capture as decisive action. The president's supporters who voted for him to bring the troops home are now seeing those same troops sent into a new, unpredictable conflict. This could create a major division within the MAGA movement. Will they support a new war if it's marketed as a business deal for oil? Or will the reality of boots on the ground and potential factional violence lead to a backlash? As we look at the photos of Maduro in handcuffs, it's important to remember that this story is about more than just one man. It's about a fundamental change in how the United States interacts with the rest of the world. It's a shift from a world of rules and institutions to a world of power and transactions. In the long-form narrative of American history, we have seen these cycles before. We have seen the big stick of the early 20th century and the regime changes of the Cold War. For a while, it seemed like we had moved past that. But this weekend showed us that history doesn't just move in one direction. It can loop back in ways that are both shocking and deeply consequential. As we close tonight, we are left with the words of the Venezuelan vice president, who said that her country will never again be anyone's colony. And the words of the American president, who says, "We are in charge." Somewhere between those two statements lies the future of an entire continent and perhaps the future of international law itself. We will be following this story as Maduro makes his first court appearances and as the first American oil technicians prepare to head south. This is a story that will define the year 2026, and we will be here to connect the dots for you every step of the way. The capture of Maduro was a tactical success. But as we have learned from history, a tactical success can sometimes lead to a strategic disaster if there is no plan for the day after. The Pottery Barn rule is now in full effect. The United States has broken the status quo in Venezuela. Now the world is waiting to see how they intend to fix it and what the true cost will be, not just in dollars and barrels of oil, but in human lives and global stability. Tonight, a man who was once a bus driver and then a president sits in a jail cell in Brooklyn. And a man who was once a businessman and is now a president sits in Florida claiming victory. But the real story is just beginning to be written in the streets of Caracas and the halls of the United Nations. We'll be watching. The situation with Colombia is perhaps the most volatile element of this entire crisis. If the U.S. moves from seizing tankers and leaders to threatening a sovereign, democratically elected neighbor like President Petro, the entire region could be set ablaze. Petro's warning about the jaguar of the people is a vivid reminder that the history of Latin America is filled with resistance to outside intervention, and we cannot forget the role of China and Russia in this geopolitical chess match. They have not just lost an ally, they have lost billions of dollars in investments. China's state-owned firms have $12 billion in outstanding loans to Venezuela. If the U.S. takes the oil, it is effectively taking it from the Chinese and the Russians as well. This is not just a regional conflict, it is a direct challenge to the other great powers of the world. In the coming days, we will see if the UN Security Council takes up the matter. We will see if other nations follow the lead of Argentina and celebrate the freedom of Venezuela, or if they follow the lead of Brazil and Mexico in condemning the affront to sovereignty. The president has said that this won't cost us anything. But history suggests that the cost of running a country is never zero. There are the costs of security, the costs of rebuilding, and the intangible costs of lost trust and damaged norms. We are seeing a resuscitated Monroe Doctrine, the idea that the Americas belong to the United States and no one else. But the world of 2026 is not the world of 1823. It is a world of global markets, nuclear powers, and instant communication. Attempting to run it with 19th century rules is a dangerous experiment. As we wrap up this special report, keep an eye on the gas prices. Keep an eye on the news from New York, and keep an eye on the mountains of Colombia. The helicopters may have finished their mission in Caracas, but the echoes of their rotors will be heard for a long, long time. Thank you for joining us for this closer look at the unprecedented events in Venezuela. We will continue to bring you the facts, the context, and the stories behind the headlines. Good night